But that wasn't the end. As Karen walked out of the courthouse, she found a crowd of Willowbrook Estates residents waiting on the steps. For a moment, her heart lifted. Maybe they'd come to support her. Karen Whitmore? A young man with a clipboard stepped forward. You've been served. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. The community is voting on your removal as president. Her hands shook as she took the papers. Behind the process server, she saw faces from her neighborhood, people whose property values she'd protected, whose community standards she'd maintained. Their expressions ranged from disappointment to outright anger. 30 years, she whispered to no one in particular. 30 years I've kept this place perfect. That evening, Karen sat in the same community center where she'd held countless meetings as the iron-fisted ruler of Willowbrook Estates. This time, she occupied a folding chair in the back row, watching the proceedings like a dethroned monarch. The vote wasn't even close, 47-3 in favor of removal. Jake Henderson approached her as the meeting broke up. Ms. Whitmore, I wanted to say something. Karen braced herself for gloating, for the final insult that would complete her humiliation. We're thinking about running for the board, he said quietly. Tommy and me. We want to make the community better, not just more controlled. Maybe you could, I don't know, help us understand how things work. The good parts, I mean. Karen stared at him, this teenager who'd started her downfall with a sledgehammer and was now offering her a lifeline. Why would you want my help? Because you do love this place, Tommy said, joining his brother. You just forgot that other people love it too. As Karen walked home through the streets she patrolled for 3 decades, she noticed things she'd been too busy controlling to really see. Kids playing in yards without worrying about noise violations. Garden flowers blooming in colors that weren't approved, but were beautiful anyway. Neighbors talking to each other instead of reporting each other. Maybe, she thought, there were different ways to protect a community. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the news coverage. Interested in discussing your experience for my documentary about HOA overreach. The working title is Homeowners from Hell. Interested? Karen stared at the message, then looked up at her house, the one with the perfectly maintained lawn, the regulation height mailbox, and the growing certainty that her story wasn't over. She typed back, when do we start filming? After all, if she was going to be the villain in someone else's story, she might as well make sure they got the details right. And who knew? Maybe it was time to write a different ending. The room went silent, except for the ticking of Karen's antique mantel clock. She'd called this meeting with 6 hours' notice. She'd been so focused on punishing the Henderson boys that she'd forgotten her own rules. Furthermore, Sarah continued, I've reviewed the community guidelines you mentioned. Section 4.21 covers cosmetic modifications and improvements. Pool removal for safety reasons falls under Section 7.3, which allows for emergency removal of hazardous structures. Karen felt like she was drowning in a pool of her own making. Emergency removal still requires good faith effort to notify the HOA, which my clients did, requires documentation of the hazard, which we have, and requires action within a reasonable timeframe to prevent injury, which they took. Janet Morrison, who'd been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Karen, maybe we should table this until the full board can review. The full board. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You mean the board that doesn't have a quorum present? The board that failed to respond to a safety notification? The board that called an improper emergency meeting to issue questionable fines? Karen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is still my community, and I won't have it turned into some free-for-all where. Your community? Jake's voice was quiet but firm. You mean our community, the one we're trying to make safer for everyone. The words hung in the air like smoke. Karen looked around her living room, her carefully arranged tribunal, and saw it for what it really was, a desperate attempt to maintain control over a situation that had already slipped through her fingers. Sarah stood and gathered her papers. Ms. Whitmore, I suggest you consult with your HOA's legal counsel before proceeding with any violations. We'll be filing our own complaint with the State Attorney General's office about improper HOA procedures. As the 3 visitors filed out, Karen remained standing in her empty living room, surrounded by folding chairs that suddenly looked more like tombstones than seats of power. The front door closed with a soft click, leaving Karen alone with the terrible realization that she might have finally picked a fight she couldn't win. By 6:30 p.m., Karen had transformed her living room into a tribunal. 7 folding chairs formed a semicircle facing a single wooden chair she dragged in from the dining room, what she privately called the defendant's seat. The Henderson boys would learn tonight that Willowbrook Estates wasn't some lawless frontier where teenagers could destroy property on a whim. The doorbell chimed at exactly 7 p.m. Karen opened it to find not just Jake and Tommy, but a third person, a woman in her 40s wearing a rumpled business suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Karen Whitmore. The woman extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen, the Henderson family's attorney." Karen's confident smile faltered for just a microsecond. "Attorney, this is a simple HOA violation hearing, not a court case." "Everything's a court case if you approach it correctly," Sarah replied pleasantly. "May we come in?" The living room suddenly felt smaller with the 3 visitors. Karen had expected to face 2 nervous teenagers. Instead, she found herself staring down a legal professional who looked like she'd eaten HOA presidents for breakfast. "Where's the rest of your board?" Sarah asked, settling into what was supposed to be Karen's chair. "They're running late," Karen lied. Truth was, only 2 had shown up. Elderly Mr. Peterson, who agreed with everything Karen said, and Janet Morrison, who tried to leave twice, but kept getting trapped in conversation. "So we have what? 3 board members present out of 7. Sarah made a note in her legal pad. "Interesting. Most HOA bylaws require a quorum for official hearings." Karen felt sweat prick her scalp. "This is an informal discussion about violations." With fines attached, Sarah smiled. "Let's see those photographs you took this morning." Reluctantly, Karen scrolled through her phone. The photos looked exactly like what they were: 2 kids cleaning up a decrepit pool. In the harsh afternoon light of legal scrutiny, her evidence seemed suddenly thin. "Tell me about the pool," Sarah said to the boys. Tommy cleared his throat. "It was built in 1987. Grandma stopped maintaining it around 2019 when she got sick. It was full of stagnant water, completely cracked, and honestly dangerous. We were afraid some kid might fall in and get hurt." "Safety concern," Sarah noted. "And you notified the HOA about this hazard when?" Karen's stomach dropped. "They didn't. Actually, we did." Jake pulled out his phone. "Email sent to the HOA management company on March 15th. Want to see the red receipts?" Karen's world tilted. She'd never seen that email. More importantly, she'd never responded to it. Sarah leaned forward. "Ms. Whitmore, what's the HOA's liability if someone is injured by a known hazard that residents have reported?" That's not. We can't be responsible for every." "Oh, but you can be. Especially when you've been notified in writing and failed to act." Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Now, about these fines you mentioned. What's the appeals process?" Karen's prepared speech about community standards and property values crumbled like the Henderson pool. She'd spent all day imagining herself as a courtroom prosecutor, but suddenly she felt like the defendant. "There's always been an appeals process," she said weakly. "Administered by whom?" The board. The same board that issued the violation." How wonderfully circular. Sarah made another note. "And what about the emergency meeting you called? Did you follow proper notification procedures?" 24 hours minimum notice to all residents for special meetings. Karen Whitmore's morning coffee exploded across her pristine white kitchen counter as she watched the Henderson twins take a sledgehammer to their backyard pool. Steam rose from her ears, not from the coffee, but from pure, unadulterated rage. "Where in the holy hell do you think you're doing?" she shrieked through her kitchen window, her voice carrying across 3 properties like a tornado siren. The Henderson boys, Jake, 19, and Tommy, 17, froze mid-swing. Their grandmother's old concrete pool lay half demolished. Chunks of blue-painted concrete scattered like broken dreams across their lawn. "Oh shit," Tommy whispered, not quietly enough. Karen's eyes narrowed to laser points. In 30 seconds flat, she'd marched across her perfectly manicured lawn, through the hedge gaps she'd been meaning to have the HOA board vote to seal, and planted herself like a vengeful garden gnome in the Henderson backyard. Language, young man. And you. She jabbed a finger at Jake, who still held the sledgehammer like he was considering using it for something other than concrete. Put that weapon down this instant. It's our pool, lady, Jake said, lowering the hammer but keeping his grip tight. Our property. Your property? Karen's laugh could have stripped paint. Nothing in Willowbrook Estates is just your property, kiddo. Every single modification, alteration, or, she gestured wildly at the destruction, demolition requires HOA approval. Section 4.21 of the Community Guidelines, which I personally rewrote last spring. The boys exchanged glances. Their grandmother had died 3 months ago, leaving them the house and apparently a whole lot of problems they'd never imagined. We're cleaning it up, Tommy said quietly. The pool was cracked, full of nasty water. It was becoming a mosquito breeding ground. I don't care if it was breeding dinosaurs. Karen's voice pitched higher. You don't touch a single nail, board, or chunk of concrete without written permission from the board. And guess who's the board president? She smiled, the kind of smile that made small children hide behind their mothers at grocery stores. Jake's jaw tightened. Look, we're trying to make this place livable. Grandma couldn't maintain it the last few years, and we're doing our best to. Your best isn't good enough. Karen pulled out her phone and started snapping photos. Unauthorized destruction of property features. Failure to submit modification requests. Improper disposal of construction materials. She gestured to the concrete chunks. Where's your permit for debris removal? Permit for what now? Tommy's voice cracked. Oh, honey. Karen's tone dripped with mock sympathy. You boys are in for a world of education. Welcome to adult life in a properly managed community. She continued photographing from every angle, narrating like a crime scene investigator. Visual documentation of willful disregard for community standards. Timestamp, 9:47 am. Saturday, violation in progress. Are you seriously going to fine us for cleaning up? Jake asked, disbelief coloring his voice. I'm going to fine you for breaking the rules. The cleanup was just the method of your crime. Karen pocketed her phone. Emergency HOA board meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. sharp. Bring your checkbooks. As she turned to leave, Tommy called out, Wait, what if we just put it back? Karen paused, her smile growing wider. Put it back? Oh, sweetie, you can't unscramble eggs, but you can pay for the privilege of learning that lesson. She strutted back toward her house, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown timer. Behind her, she heard Jake mutter something about crazy old bat, but she didn't turn around. She had phone calls to make. Within an hour, Karen had contacted all 7 board members, the community management company, and her lawyer cousin in Tampa. The Henderson boys had just made the biggest mistake of their young lives, and she was going to make sure they never forgot it. But as she sat in her home office, drafting violation notices and calculating fines, something nagged at the back of her mind. The Henderson house had been quiet for too long before today. Too quiet, like the calm before a storm she hadn't seen coming. She shook off the feeling and reached for her calculator. Some storms were worth weathering if they taught the right lessons. 3 weeks later, Karen sat in actual courtroom, but not as the prosecutor she'd always imagined herself to be. She was the defendant, flanked by a nervous young lawyer the HOA's insurance company had provided, facing a civil lawsuit that had grown far beyond a simple pool dispute. Your Honor, Sarah Chen addressed the judge. What began as harassment over a necessary safety demolition has revealed a pattern of HOA abuse spanning several years. Karen's hands trembled as she watched Sarah present evidence she'd never seen coming. Emails from other residents complaining about Karen's arbitrary enforcement. Photos of violations she'd ignored when they involved her friends. Financial records showing how she'd manipulated the budget to fund her personal vendetta projects. The worst part, the community had turned against her. Neighbors she protected, rules she'd enforced for their benefit, all of it crumbling because of 2 teenagers and a broken pool. Mrs. Peterson, Sarah called her first witness. Can you tell the court about your experience with Ms. Whitmore's enforcement policies? The elderly woman, Karen, had considered an ally, stood up slowly. She fined my grandson $500 for parking his motorcycle in my driveway. Said it was an unauthorized vehicle. But when her nephew brings his food truck to the summer barbecue, that's perfectly fine. Karen's lawyer objected, but the damage was spreading like cracks in concrete. One by one, residents testified about Karen's selective enforcement, her midnight patrols with a flashlight, her habit of measuring grass heights with a ruler at dawn. And the pool? The judge asked Jake Henderson. We rebuilt it, Your Honor. Properly permitted, professionally installed, and safer than it's ever been. Ms. Whitmore tried to stop the construction workers from entering the community. She did what? Chained herself to the gate, Tommy added. Fire department had to cut her loose. Karen closed her eyes, remembering that day. She thought she was making a principled stand. The local news had called it a Vigilant Blocks pool installation, complete with footage of her being escorted away by paramedics who'd insisted on checking her for heat stroke. The judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom. This court finds that Ms. Whitmore exceeded her authority as HOA president and engaged in harassment of the Henderson family. The HOA is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $25,000, plus attorney fees.